Hello, I'm Kayla from K&D Cosplay. You can find me here on YouTube, but also over on Instagram, which is where I post all of my current cosplay builds and what I'm working on, and you can find all of my cosplays from the past. It's been my social media of choice, but I am trying to break into video editing and content creation. There's a lot to learn, so I am hoping to start now. This will hopefully be the first video in a series of videos for my next build, which is actually sort of a recreation of my very first handmade cosplay, which was Princess Daisy from Mario. I first started cosplaying in August of 2022 when I went to PAX West in Seattle, and I have wanted to recreate that cosplay. I've learned a lot more about sewing since then, and that cosplay has not held up, and I believe I could do a lot better now. So this cosplay is going to be a lot more elaborate than that original cosplay, but I will get more into detail on my plans for that in an upcoming video. For now, I am starting with my very first foundation garment. So that is the chemise, which will be worn beneath my corset, which I also intend to make in another upcoming video. So the pattern that I am going to use to make this, or rather I've already made it, I didn't film an introduction, which is why I'm filming it now. I've already completed the chemise. But the pattern that I'm using is this pattern from McCalls. It's McCalls M7915. It is a Angela Clayton pattern, and based on my measurements, I will be making the size 22, which is the largest that this pattern comes in. And I actually ended up mostly using this pattern as a rough guideline and going way off book with it. So I really loved this pattern. I do like my finished chemise quite a lot, and I will use it again in the future. I just didn't follow the pattern to a T, and that comes down to my own misunderstanding with pin tucks and having a tendency to get ahead of myself when it comes to sewing. So for now, I'm going to well, before I hop right in, I should let you know what I used for this project, I suppose. So this chemise is made with polycotton broadcloth. I ordered this myself through Fabric Wholesale Direct. This is not sponsored. I'll link below where I got this from. I like the polycotton broadcloth from them. I've used it before for my Rosie cosplay that I just recently completed. You can see pictures of that on my Instagram. It's a really nice, just basic fabric. I use it a lot for mock-ups as well. And I also used some leftover lace from my Rosie cosplay and some lace that I thrifted. So those are the materials that I'll be using for this, as well as some thrifted ribbon. And then I will also, actually that's all I used. There were no other materials used in this build. So without further ado, if all you're interested in is the finished project, this is a longer video. I tried to film as much of my progress as I could. So while I did speed up a lot of the footage and cut out repetitive pieces, just go ahead and skip to the end if all you're interested in is the finished chemise. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy, and hopefully I will get better at this as I go. I started off this project by cutting out the front panel guide sheet, and this has the guide for the pin tucks. I couldn't really figure this out. There wasn't an outline to how you were supposed to make the pin tucks based off of this. It had a guide for a lot of folds, but it didn't seem possible to make as many pin tucks out of this guide as it showed fold lines. So I ended up choosing to make a pin tuck on every third line, and this is what you see me marking here in pencil. So I chose to do every third line, and I'm using pencil because I could not find my fabric marker, and then I ended up pulling out my iron and doing one side at a time. So I started with one side, ironing and stitching down each line one at a time so that I didn't get mixed up and end up stitching two of the same side. Though I guess with the bodice piece it wouldn't have made much of a difference, since at this point it's just two rectangles, so it could be flipped. But that's what you see me doing here. After I had completed the bodice portion, I cut out the skirt side front pieces, and this also has a guide for the pin tucks. I had a similar problem of trying to figure out how many pin tucks you were supposed to do based on this guide. There wasn't really any instructions that I could find about the pin tucks, so I ended up doing the same thing that I did on the top bodice guide, and I made the choice to do a pin tuck on every third line. So you will see me marking in pencil a line on every third line, and I will mark it out with a ruler, and I go through on both pieces to mark it out with a ruler and go through with an iron. And I only go through on video with one piece, but I do the same thing on both pieces, just mirrored. Working through this pattern, there were not instructions specifically on how they wanted the pin tucks cut out and done. They had the pin tucks guide, but the guide didn't tell you how long, like, to cut out extra fabric or anything for the pin tucks. And I ended up not following
specifically the guide. And I'm sure it's not going to end up the exact size because there's far more pin tucks on the pattern. And that's fine. I have far fewer pin tucks here. But the problem I'm running into is because I cut out the guide piece and then did my pin tucks, is that it is smaller than the pattern piece that I'm supposed to cut out of it. According to the directions, there's a lot of extra fabric left over after the pin tucks are on here. So my guess is that originally it was a much longer piece of fabric that was then pin tucked down to get all of the pin tucks, because on the guide piece, you can see it here on the guide piece for the skirt, so it's probably the same issue, where the skirt, I'll probably run into this same issue, has all of these pin tucks after the fact. These are all fold lines, so it probably has this many pin tucks on the finished piece. So it probably has you cut out a much larger piece, but it doesn't specify in the directions. So my finished piece is much smaller after the pin tucks on both the skirt piece and these pieces. And I did a pin tuck on every third line here because there was just no way following this pattern piece that I was going to get a pin tuck out of every single one of these lines. If I followed it, there's just no way to do it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do a lace insert on the side of the pin tucks. There's plenty of lace on this chemise anyways, so I don't think it'll look out of place. So I'm just going to add a lace insert, and I think that will look just fine, and it will add just enough to be able to cut out the pattern piece, and I don't think it will look fine. As far as the skirt goes, I will cross that bridge when I get to it. To self before doing an experiment to not just add in a piece of lace the exact same measurement as the seam allowance that you're taking out. Because you'll end up with the exact same piece, or exact same size piece that you originally started with. So that's fine. It'll just be a lacier chemise than originally intended. When putting together this lace insertion, for some reason I decided to serge the edges of the poly cotton. However, I realized in future pieces that this wasn't necessary. Due to the 5/8 inch seam allowance, I'm able to fold over the seam allowance and stitch it down in such a way that the raw edges are not visible, so there wasn't any need to do this. So I am able to do that with all of the seams to keep it from fraying. So you can see me here actually turning it over and tucking those seams down once it's attached so that those seams are not exposed. And so I'm inserting that new panel in hopes that it will give me enough space to be able to cut out the front bodice piece. Okay, so for my second insertion, because I like to make things more complicated for myself and I don't like to redo things, I just did a double layer of this lace, lined it up with each other, and sewed over the join. I may end up putting something decorative over the join at some point, or just putting a straight piece of white ribbon or another narrow piece of lace, but I don't have anything in my stash right this moment that I like the look of. So I'm going to leave it for right this second, but to test if I got the sizing right this time, and it fits. So I will go ahead and do that on the other side. And all I did on this side, and for both of them really, is 1 inch away from the edge of this, or 2 inches away, sorry, from the edge of this lace, I made a line. I cut along that line and I serged the edges, and then I laid right sides to right sides and stitched the lace to it, flipped it and stitched it down, and then laid right side to right side on the other side, stitched it, flipped it, and stitched the edge down so that it would have a nice edge on the insertion. And I didn't care about these edges lining up at all because that's all going to be cut off. So I'm going to go ahead off camera, do the other side, and then cut out my pattern pieces and then move on from this piece. After the front bodice pieces have been assembled, this is the center front bodice piece. So it has you cut out this front rectangle and mark off the lace insertion strips. So once those have been marked, I go and get my box of lace. This box has all of the lace that I've accumulated. A lot of this has been thrifted or is left over from other projects. A lot of the lace that's in this project comes from a previous cosplay project where I was planning to film my progress, and then I got caught up in the process and forgot to film, and so that didn't end up happening. So this piece of lace is a small piece of thrifted lace that happened to have just enough for this. So it has you cut out 3 strips and pin it down. You sew down each side of the lace, and then you cut down the middle of the fabric behind it. And once the middle of that fabric has been cut, you flip the edges down back from behind and you seam those down so you'll be able to see through the lace and your raw edges are protected. And then you take a couple strips of lace and sew it down the long edges of the side of the panel. And then that panel that you just created would then go in between the side front bodice pieces that you have created for the chemise. I tried to get a close-up of me sewing the lace strips down for you. I'm going to try and be better about double checking my camera angles in the future and making sure that I don't have any body parts in the way, because I realized that for the majority of this clip my hand is in the way. But as you can see, you just sew down the edge of one side of the lace and then you go back through and sew down the other side so that the center of the lace is free and not stitched down. Once you have that center panel assembled, it has you attach it to the other two bodice pieces. Somehow my piece ended up too short in comparison to the other two bodice pieces. I ended up remedying this later by just adding a strip of lace to the very bottom of that center panel later, and the same lace that I used on the side of that central panel ended up being the exact width that I needed. So you'll see later on that I just added a horizontal strip of that at the very bottom, and that filled in the space really nicely, and it's like it was meant to be. So I was able to just throw that in there, sew everything together, fold over all the seams and tack them down, and move on from there. Off camera, because I forgot to record it because it happened after dinner, I took a different piece of lace and used the guide for the top band and cut it to length, and I actually ended up cutting that piece of lace in half down the middle and inserted a piece of lace that's meant to have ribbon lace woven through it in between, and that created the top band for the top of the chemise for both the front and the back. And then you will see here in just a moment that those strips, and then I ran a line of gathering stitches on the front and back of the chemise, and then those are gathered down to fit those front and back bands. And then on the next frame, you will actually see I put together a lot of this after dinner and forgot to film it. So you'll see the piece of lace that was added to the bottom. The entire piece was French seamed together at the side, and then I attached that ribbon lace all the way around on the bottom. I chose not to gather the bottom of this piece together. I chose to leave it all the way open because I'm actually going to insert elastic all the way around instead of having the side open to attach it. I'm just want to pull it over my head. And then I also bound the underarm with bias tape, and then I used the same ribbon lace with some ribbon woven through it for straps. And then I have put the ribbon through the ribbon lace on the front and the back. The back is fully attached and pulled taut and attached on both sides, but on the front it's only attached on one side and loose in the middle so that I'm able to adjust it. And I'm really liking how this is all looking. It's a lot more neat and tidy than I was anticipating on the inside. I'm really trying to take my time with this piece. I historically rush through projects and don't take my time to make sure that all of the seams are tidy and finished, and I have a tendency to just skip through projects quickly and not make sure things are done the right way, or I accept flaws that would otherwise annoy me. But last night I had cut out all the other pieces that I needed to complete the bottom half, so that's all ready to go once I get started on it. To start the bottom half of the skirt, it has you take the very center piece and add a strip of lace on both sides, and this is constructed similarly to every other portion of this chemise, where you add it with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and then tuck under the seam and fold under your raw edges and seam it down. I bumped the camera here because my husband needed something. Thankfully, I noticed it pretty quickly and it didn't stay tipped over for the entire frame. But this goes down pretty quickly. I was running out of lace here and I was worried I wasn't going to have enough of it for this project, but I had just enough. But you can see here what I do. So it's flipped to the wrong side. You have that nice wide seam allowance. So that just gets folded under so the raw edge is fully enclosed. And I just pin it down on both sides and that gets seamed down so that nothing is exposed. Once the lace has been attached and that seam has been tacked down on both sides, then the side panels that I put together yesterday can be attached. These are the panels that have the pin tucks on them, and I didn't realize as I was going through and pinning this down and getting it ready that I was not doing this correctly. I wasn't paying enough attention, and I went through the process of getting this pinned and getting this seamed, and it was early in the morning. It was about 7 a.m. here, and I had not had my coffee yet. It was still cooling down enough to drink, but I was rearing to go, and I got it flipped open, and I started getting this turned under, and I realized right about here that this was not the correct side because the pin tuck should not be visible. So I ended up deciding to I was trying to figure out if I wanted to leave it as is, and then I was like, nope, no, I need to do this right. So I went and I seam ripped it off camera. I went and set up my computer, drank my coffee, watched some YouTube videos, and as I was doing that, I just got the other two panels correctly pinned so that I could go back and sew it down correctly and get this done the right way so that I wouldn't regret it later, because I was trying to decide if maybe I liked it sewn down that way. Maybe I would like having the seam on the incorrect side. But I am glad that I took the time to do it correctly. And so here I am just sewing it down on the correct side, and then I will flip it over and seam it down so that everything is tucked away the way it's supposed to be. Once those panels are attached, then the back panel gets French seamed. I only did one side because I want to leave this open and flat for attaching the bottom panel and the ruffles. I figured it would be easier to attach it while it is all flat than when it's in the round. It's just easier to work with things when they're flat as much as possible. So that is what I decided to do. And I was having a little bit of trouble at the top getting that one part to stay where I wanted it to, but I did get it to stay there eventually. It was about that time that I realized that due to how the Pin-Tuck panel was made, and because I had made changes to the top of the chemise and I didn't do gathers at the top in order to be able to pull it over my head instead of having a side opening, that it was going to be too narrow to line up with the top of the chemise. So in order to make them the same size, I decided to do a lace insert. So about 2 inches from the side of the pin tucks, I did a line and cut the panels open on both sides, and I made another lace insert. And this is a more yellowy lace because I didn't have enough of the other lace in my stash anymore. So you can see me here just doing the same insertion method that I've done on the rest of the chemise, where it's attached the right sides together, flipped over, and the seam is tucked under and stitched down so all the raw edges are tucked away. here I am serging the top and bottom edge after I've done those insertions. I realized after the fact I didn't actually need to serge the bottom edge because once I put the bottom panel on, it's going to have that same 5/8 seam allowance as everything else, and I'm going to be tucking that under and stitching that down. But the top edge is going to be attached directly to the lace band and won't be able to have that raw edge tucked under, so it does need to be serged in order to protect it from fraying, because the poly cotton broadcloth does fray considerably, so I did want that edge to be protected. Off camera, I attached the bottom panel and the ruffle panels with French seams. I also attached a crocheted lace that I thrifted to the bottom, and this was done the same seaming method as everything else, and as the lace insertion, and then that raw edge was tucked under. The top was then gathered down and evenly gathered. I did a double row of gathering stitches just to try and make sure that those stitches didn't break on me, and then I separated those out with pins, trying to find the halfway point and then the quarter points to make it easier to match those up to the halfway points and quarter points on the bottom panel to be able to make my gathers as even as possible. I just recently did another gather project that some of my gathers were more heavily centered on one side of the project, and that really annoyed me, so I tried to avoid that as much as possible with this project. Once those have been gathered and attached to the bottom panel, they are seamed together, and then that seam is folded over and the raw edge is encased and stitched down so that it has a nice enclosed seam, and then that bottom panel is lined up with the bottom of the chemise and is pinned down and attached in the same manner. So right sides are together, it's stitched down with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then that seam allowance is folded over with the raw edge encased and stitched down so that it is left with a nice neat seam allowance. At the very end, this whole thing is finished with a French seam on the side to enclose it in a loop. So I just finished piecing together the bottom half of the chemise, and I wanted to go over some changes that I made to the pattern, since at this point I'm mostly just winging it before I piece the two pieces together and finish it and call this project done. So at this point I have the top half of the chemise, which is fully assembled and ready to piece together with the lower half of the chemise. And originally in the pattern they have you leave one side open and have you gather the bottom of the chemise down, and you would put it over your head and attach it at the side. I decided, however, not to do that. I am instead going to put elastic through my lace here at the middle and be able to, it's large enough that I will be able to just pull this over my head, and then I have attached the lace or my ribbon directly on the side here on each side, and then I will be able to just adjust it and tie it here in the center to make this tighter or looser, and then that way I can just pull it on and off over my head. I didn't want the extra attachments under the corset. I find that uncomfortable. I just want to be able to pull it on and off over my head. And then at the back side, I just put it on my dress form and drew through the ribbon until it looked about the width that I thought it would need to be comfortable, pinned the ribbon in place and tried it on and felt that that was a good width. So that ribbon on the back is just permanently stitched, and the straps are just the same lace with the ribbon through it. And that way I can, with the sleeves off to the side for the look that I'm going for with my daisy, I will be able to just, once the corset is on, I can just pop these off of my shoulders because they're fairly thin, and I think it will be a fairly versatile chemise for other looks as well for wearing under the corset. So this is completely done. It has definitely been a challenge for myself. I tend to rush through projects and leave the insides of my projects fairly messy, and I'm trying to learn new sewing techniques and get better at actually finishing projects. And with the exception of the front top seam here where the edge is just serged, I have turned back and stitched under all of the seams under themselves, because for the majority of the pattern it has you, except for where the seams are French seamed, it has you have a 5/8 seam allowance. So I've been doing the 5/8 seam allowance, and then I fold that over itself and then fold that down and stitch it down, so it leaves a nice finished hem or seam with no raw edges. And so I've been doing that with all the lace insertions and with all of the seams, especially on this bottom petticoat or petticoat bottom of the chemise. So that is all assembled as well, and I also made some changes to that because of the issues that I ran into trying to do the pin tucks, because there wasn't a good explanation on the pattern for the pin tucks, and so my piece wasn't wide enough, especially since I did not do the gathering on the bottom of the top of the chemise like the pattern would call for. Since I decided to just elasticate the waistband instead of gathering it down and having the side open, I want to be able to pull it over the top. It was not wide enough around to line up with the top of the chemise. So what I ended up doing was creating another insertion panel out of another lace, and it's kind of a more yellowed lace, so it actually matches a little bit with the yellowed lace that I have up here at the top and the bias tape that I have under the arm. So I created a wider panel to insert on the same panel that has the pin tucks. So that just created a larger lace insert on the front of the chemise. And then you have the lower panel, the ruffle, and then I had this lovely crocheted lace that I got at a thrift store that had been removed from something that still had some string in it from being removed from a blanket or another garment. So I used that on the bottom of the ruffle to hem it, and I did the same thing where I actually attached this a little bit away from the edge, did the 5/8 seam, and then folded it over so that there was no raw edge showing, and that gave me a really nice hem at the bottom, and then attached everything. So on the inside, everything is, there's no raw edges on the inside of the chemise. So now all I need to do is, and then at the top of this, it's currently serged because for this particular part, I'm not going to be able to, where this is going to attach to the lace here. I had the same problem at the bottom of the chemise. I'm not going to be able to do the rollover attachment like I did with the other seams because this is just not wide enough. So to protect the edges and keep it from fraying, I've serged it before stitching it onto the ribbon. So I did the same thing at the top of the bottom part of the chemise, and now all I need to do is pin this all the way around and attach it to the ribbon, insert my elastic, and trim all of the loose ends, and the chemise will be finished and I'll get to try it on. So I'm going to get working on that and get that attached. Overall, I'm really happy with this chemise. It's a lot lighter weight than the last chemise that I made for a previous project. It helps that I used a lighter weight fabric. I used an old bed sheet for that last chemise, so it was a lot heavier. I love all of the lace, so I am actually really glad that things didn't work out with parts of this so that I could have all the extra lace insertions on it because I really like the look here. I am wearing a pair of shorts and a sports bra with this since there is all of the lace. I didn't want to be showing off anything on YouTube that I shouldn't be. I do feel like it might be a little long, but I'm not very tall. I'm only 5'4". And I do know Angela Clayton, who made this pattern, is a bit taller than I am. I do really like the changes that I made with the elasticated waistband and being able to pull it over my head. If I did make this chemise again, which I probably will, I think I would take some of the volume out of the back panel because I do feel like there is a lot of extra space there. But overall, I'm very happy with this project, and I am excited to keep going with this build. So I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that maybe it helped you learn something, because I definitely learned more with this build, and I hope to see you again. Thank you very much for coming along for the ride.